He didn't scream that night. He didn't throw the glass or punch the wall like men do in movies. He just looked at me, long enough for the air to thicken between us, and then sat down, as if his legs could no longer carry the truth he'd just found. That was the first thing that broke me, his silence. We used to talk about everything. How we'd grow old, how we'd travel, how we'd never become like those couples who sleep beside each other but dream alone. But somewhere between bills, deadlines, and forgotten anniversaries, our conversations turned into reminders. Don't forget the water bill. I'll be late. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? Every word was a transaction. I didn't even notice when the warmth drained out of his voice. It was a slow leak that never made a sound. He was a good man, steady, predictable, maybe too much of both. He worked long hours and came home tired, but he never failed to ask if I'd eaten. I told myself that was enough, that stability was love in another language. But the truth is, I missed being seen. I missed the version of him who used to listen without checking the time. Loneliness doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly, like dust on furniture. You notice it only when the light hits just right. Mine started on an ordinary Thursday. I was scrolling through old photos, looking for something I couldn't name, when a message popped up. A familiar name, someone from before my marriage. The conversation started harmlessly, catching up, old jokes, harmless nostalgia. It stayed harmless until I caught myself waiting for his replies. Every text was a heartbeat, every pause an ache. And I told myself it was innocent because we hadn't touched. But emotional infidelity doesn't need skin, it needs attention. And I was starving for it. I still remember the night I crossed the line. It wasn't planned, it wasn't passionate, it was desperate. A need to feel wanted, not out of vanity, but from the hollow place that once belonged to love. His hands didn't feel like home, they felt like proof that I still existed. When it was over, the room felt smaller, the air colder. I told myself it was a mistake, one I could bury beneath the routines of marriage. I came home before midnight, showered, cooked breakfast the next morning, smiled across the table like nothing happened. He noticed. Of course he did. He noticed the way I couldn't meet his eyes, how I laughed too quickly, how I started leaving my phone face down. But he didn't say anything. Not then. Days passed in uneasy quiet. He'd sit beside me, watching TV, his arm resting on the back of the couch but never touching me. Sometimes he'd look at me a moment too long, like he was searching for the woman he used to know. And I kept pretending, because pretending was easier than confessing. One evening, I came home late again. The lights were low, dinner cold on the table. He was sitting by the window, the curtains half drawn, the city humming outside. He looked at me with that same stillness, a quiet that pressed against my chest. I opened my mouth to lie. Traffic, work, something came up, but the words tangled in my throat. I saw it then, he already knew. He didn't need to ask. The truth lived in his eyes, heavy and patient. And in that silence, I understood the kind of man he was, the kind who endured, not because he was weak, but because breaking something once loved felt worse than being broken himself. That was the night the silence changed. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was waiting. The night he finally spoke, the world felt unnaturally still. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, the refrigerator hummed like a nervous witness. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the air itself was waiting for what he was about to say. He stood by the table, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee mug, eyes fixed somewhere beyond me. When did it start? His voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't even loud. Just measured, controlled in a way that made my stomach twist. I froze. The lie I'd rehearsed all week, some half-truth about a misunderstanding, about friendship, died on my tongue. His calm stripped every excuse bare before it could form. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like paper. It wasn't. I began, but he lifted his hand, quieting me without anger, without accusation. Please, he said softly, don't make me hear another lie. Something inside me cracked then. I'd braced myself for fury, for him to shout, to curse, to call me names that could justify my guilt. I thought anger would make it easier to hate myself, easier to play the villain and accept the ending I deserved. But instead, he sat down, and his restraint became unbearable. He didn't cry. He didn't pace. He just looked at me like someone studying a wound they already knew couldn't be stitched closed. I wanted him to rage, to throw something, to make noise. Anything but this quiet grief that filled the room like smoke. "How long have you known?" I whispered. He took a moment before answering. "Long enough to wish I hadn't." His eyes flickered toward the window, toward the faint light spilling through the curtains. "You started hiding your phone. You stopped touching me. I could feel you leaving before you walked out the door." I lowered my gaze, tears blurring everything. "I'm sorry." The words felt small, useless, like a band-aid over a fracture. He nodded once, slowly, as if he'd expected the apology but didn't believe it mattered. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't erase what I've seen when I close my eyes." His voice wavered for the first time then, not with anger, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from holding yourself together too tightly for too long. He took a deep breath, and I could see the tremor in his hands. Yet even in that moment, he kept his composure. It was as if he'd chosen to bleed quietly rather than let me see how deep the cut went. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" I asked. He looked up at me, and his expression was something I'll never forget, part pain, part resignation, part something stronger than both. "Because I needed time," he said. "Time to make sure that when I finally looked at you, I wouldn't see only the betrayal. I wanted to see the person I loved, one last time." The weight of those words crushed me. He had spent days knowing, pretending, enduring, just to find the strength to face me without hate. That realization shattered whatever fragments of pride I still had left. I reached for his hand, but he didn't move. His eyes glistened, but the tears never fell. "Do you still love me?" I asked, almost afraid to hear it. He hesitated, then spoke with brutal honesty. "Love doesn't disappear overnight. It just hurts differently now." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was alive with everything we couldn't say. Every heartbeat was a reminder of what I'd destroyed and what he refused to let destroy him. That night, I learned that endurance isn't loud. It doesn't fight or plead. It waits, breathes, and carries pain with a grace that feels almost inhuman. And sitting across from him, drowning in his quiet strength, I realized his endurance wasn't weakness, it was the purest form of love I'd ever seen. The morning after our conversation, everything looked the same, yet nothing was. The sunlight still reached the curtains, the kettle still whistled, but there was an absence hanging between us, a quiet void where comfort used to live. We moved around each other like polite strangers, careful not to touch, careful not to feel. He poured his coffee, black as always, and I watched the steam rise, curling upward and disappearing, just like the warmth that once lived in us. He didn't speak, neither did I. It wasn't anger keeping him silent this time, it was acceptance, and that terrified me more than any rage ever could. In the days that followed, life became a performance. We did the dishes together. We folded laundry. We smiled at the neighbors. From the outside, we must have looked ordinary, two people keeping their promises. But underneath it all, something fragile was rotting. I could feel it in every measured breath he took. He didn't punish me. That would have been easier to bear. He stayed. He woke up early, went to work, paid the bills, and came home at the same time every night. His routines remained untouched, as if discipline could keep his heart from collapsing. There was a strange nobility in it, a man refusing to let heartbreak turn him cruel. One evening, I made his favorite meal. I spent hours perfecting every detail, the right amount of spice, the softest bread, the scent of garlic lingering just long enough to feel like home. When he sat down, he smiled faintly, said, "Smells good," and ate in silence. Each bite felt like a confession I hadn't yet made. After dinner, I asked, "Do you hate me?" My voice trembled, afraid of the truth but desperate for it. He wiped his mouth, set down the fork, and shook his head. "No," he said simply. "Hate would make this easier." His words landed like stones. There was no venom, no resentment, just quiet sorrow. It was then I understood that his endurance wasn't about pretending he wasn't hurt. It was about refusing to become someone he wasn't. He wouldn't let my betrayal dictate the kind of man he would be. But for me, that endurance became unbearable. His calmness exposed my chaos. His forgiveness felt like a mirror, forcing me to confront what I'd done without the comfort of punishment. Every kind gesture, every act of patience, made me feel smaller, like I was standing before a version of humanity I didn't deserve to touch. At night, he slept on the couch. I'd wake up in our bed and stare at the empty space beside me, tracing the outline where his warmth used to be. Some nights, I'd walk to the living room, see him asleep with his arm over his eyes, and want to whisper something, anything, that could rebuild what I'd broken. But I never did. The words always dissolved before they reached my lips. Weeks passed like that. Quiet mornings, quiet dinners, quiet everything. I began to realize he wasn't enduring for me. He was enduring for himself, for the promise he'd made long before the betrayal. He once told me that love was a choice you make every day, even when it's difficult. And I had chosen escape, while he chose to stay. That contrast burned, because no matter how much I cried, apologized, or tried to make it right, I could never match his strength. His endurance wasn't passive, it was defiant. It was a declaration: you cannot take my decency away, no matter what you do to me. And watching him hold himself together with that quiet, devastating grace, I understood that I had mistaken endurance for weakness all along. He was the stronger one. He always had been. It's strange how time doesn't heal everything, it just teaches you how to live with what can't be fixed. Months passed. The rhythm of our days softened into something bearable but hollow, like a song played on a broken instrument. We didn't fight anymore. There was nothing left to fight for. Only the quiet routine of two people honoring the memory of what used to be love. He still made coffee every morning. Still folded my laundry with the same precision. Still remembered my schedule better than I did. But the warmth behind those gestures was gone, replaced by something heavier, duty, maybe, or compassion stripped of affection. His eyes never lingered anymore, and mine never dared to search them. We lived like ghosts in the home we once built together. I thought I could learn to live with that. That forgiveness, even unspoken, would be enough to fill the space between us. But forgiveness without closeness is a kind of exile. I was forgiven, yes, but I was no longer loved. One night, months after the confession, I found him standing on the balcony, staring into the distance. The city lights painted him in shades of gold and blue. He looked calm, but there was a stillness in him that felt final, like the quiet before departure. "Are we okay?" I asked. It was a foolish question, but silence had become unbearable. He turned toward me, and in his eyes, I saw a truth I'd been avoiding: he was tired. Not of me, exactly, but of carrying the weight of what I'd done. His endurance had outlasted love. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile you give when you've already made peace with the outcome. "You'll be okay," he said. "I think that's enough." And just like that, I understood. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even hurt anymore. He was simply done, finished with the endless balancing act between love and pain. He'd endured long enough to let go, and that was the hardest part to accept. He moved out 2 weeks later. No shouting, no ultimatums, no emotional scene. Just quiet packing, folded clothes, labeled boxes. I stood in the doorway, watching him take pieces of our life and fit them into the trunk of his car. When he closed it, he looked at me one last time. "I hope you find peace," he said softly. "You deserve to, even after everything." And then he left. No dramatic goodbye, no lingering look. Just the sound of the engine fading into the distance, and the echo of everything he hadn't said. In the months that followed, I kept replaying that night, the one where he sat in silence, holding the truth like a fragile glass that could shatter at any moment. I used to think his endurance was weakness, a refusal to face reality. But now I see it for what it was: strength. The kind of strength that doesn't demand attention, that doesn't shout its pain, that simply exists because giving in would mean losing yourself. His endurance that night made me see myself clearly for the first time. It made me realize that love isn't proven in grand gestures or declarations. It's proven in the quiet choice to stay human when hurt tempts you to become cruel. I never became that strong. I wanted to. I tried. But some lessons aren't meant to be mastered, only remembered. Sometimes, when the night gets too quiet, I think about him. About how he never raised his voice, never sought revenge, never let bitterness claim him. His silence wasn't weakness, it was a kind of victory. A quiet, human triumph over everything I destroyed. And if anyone ever asks what I regret most, I'll tell them this. It's not the betrayal. It's that I met someone who showed me what real strength looks like, and I broke it.